Hello, Shadarek here. Today I have a video going over a wish list of kind of what I want for both a late wish list for Season 3 of The War Within, as well as just ongoing design for Havoc in general. So, let's take a look at exactly what I have on my list here. Now, there's a good amount of stuff that I do want. And I'm just going to kind of go through them one by one. My want of these is a lot. It's varying in how important I think a lot of this is. But let me just work down my list. First, I love to see some form of I-beam damage reduction. Reasoning for this is it puts you in a lot of very dangerous situations, and I-beam just causes a lot of friction in gameplay as a melee DPS where you're supposed to be able to be pretty mobile, and it is on a very short cooldown now. We don't really have much haste. It ends up being a pretty long cast time. And this is something that we have to use pretty much on cooldown for 20 seconds. And if you don't finish the cast, you're punished by more than just like, it's not like canceling a cast, moving and doing it again. It's a channel. You cancel it, it's done. You lose any damage that was left over, and you don't get your Furious Gaze buff. So if we were to add a small damage reduction to this, I'm not thinking something where it's like, oh, you're just immune to damage. But think things like current killing spree for Rogue, where they get a large damage reduction and don't really have to worry so much about doing it, or anything similar like that. Even if it was just 10/20% tied to Blind Fury, I think it would be nice to have. Next is increase in Blur power. Blur is a pretty weak cooldown. Specifically, I think it's the only 20% DR really left in the game that doesn't have a viable option to increase it. I know that Ret Paladin and Holy Paladin do have 20% DR on Divine Protection. I know at least for Ret Paladin, that's a choice node to increase it to 40% DR with Shield of Vengeance, so you get an extra button out of it. What I was thinking would be nice is looking at our talent tree here. Personally, I would like it if Netherwalk became baseline, and we got a different choice node here. We kept Desperate Instincts, as it's not for high-end gameplay. This is for, more casual players, so that Blurb will automatically use itself and get some value. And I think it's fun if that's the design and that talent exists. However, it makes Desperate Instincts pretty much unplayable in non-trivial content because that will proc so often at horrible times and leave you cooldownless. I would like Desperate Instincts to then become a choice node with another talent that just increases Blur cooldown reduction by 10%. So we would get another walk baseline, which again, still not an immunity, 100% damage reduction while you're in it. Can't attack, can't fell rush, and use mobility, can't use utility spells, no imprison, no interrupt. So there's a lot of limits to Netherwalk already as to when you can use it. It's really not an amazing button, even if it is decently good. And then, yeah, that would allow us to have an extra 10% damage reduction on Blur, because dying through Blur is such a consistent issue on Havoc, because 20% DR is just not strong. And anytime Havoc is left unable to hit a boss, or a boss is immune, something like that, it is pretty much the squishiest class in the game at that point. So yeah, that's just something I'd like to see changed. I think playing around a 20% DR feels pretty bad. Doubling this with the fact that the higher dodge chance you have in World of Warcraft, the higher chance you have to get crit by mobs auto attacks. So we have a funny interaction right now where if you press Blur, while you have about a 65% chance to dodge, you have a greatly increased chance to receive a critical strike. So on that 1/3 of the chance that you do get hit, you'll actually take more damage than if you hadn't blurred. On 30%, that would still be the case, but maybe it wouldn't be dying through your wall to a single auto attack in weekly keys like happens now. Next, I'd like to see the Soul Generation removed from Chaos Nova. Now, this is incredibly relevant in Mythic Plus. There's scenarios where if you can just slam Chaos Nova on 20 mobs, and your Chaos Raven talents here, it'll spawn on average about 6 souls. That is a full Reaver's Glaive, and Reaver's Glaive also refunds the soul. It's actually more than a full Reaver's Glaive. This is a really significant damage increase, something I make use of all the time that I see underused by almost every Havoc. The downside is you're stunning the mobs randomly because you're kind of doing it for damage. You can't really hold it for a CC rotation if you want to do optimal DPS, and it's not a small amount that you're gaining. And it puts stun DR on the mobs. Now, this is really awkward because when we're in a comp with other stuns, uh, stun DR is something that we run into often. And for anyone that doesn't know, because I have talked to people that just don't know what this is pretty recently, um, I'm talking about diminishing returns on CC. In World of Warcraft, diminishing returns will happen on CC when you use the same type of CC consecutively. So the first stun is full value, the second stun will be half, and the third stun will be 1/4 value. So if I Chaos Nova and then we use a 4-second stun on a mob, it'll be 2 seconds. And then if we try to, say, Hodge a mob with a 6-second stun after those 2 stuns, it'll only be a second and a half. After that, they're immune to stuns until those diminishing returns wear off. I'm not sure the timer. I think it's about 30 seconds. Um, so when you consider the fact that we're using Chaos Nova rotationally, and my next point, Metamorphosis Leap is obviously part of our rotation and also stuns mobs. It is incredibly frustrating that right now, any pack that I'm going into with meta, I'm using 2 of the 3 stun DRs on the mobs. After that, we can't use stuns as a stop on mobs anymore, and there are times where we then have to hold Chaos Nova because of the fact that it's going to cause DRs. And I know it's, okay, hey, dumbass, just don't use your stun, who cares about your damage? This is why I'm saying to remove it from being a damage oriented thing. It just shouldn't be. Our CC should not be damaged. We've learned this exact thing before with Sigil of Misery when it used to be a damage amp. It was something that everybody hated. So, please God, remove the Soul Generation from Chaos Nova. As I mentioned with Metamorphosis, I would like that to be changed from a stun to a disorient. Really, any form of CC, but having it be a disorient so it just does like a small stop on the mobs, or even if it were like a small knock-up or something, I would think that would be a lot better than it being a stun. As a stun, the only answer is to use our damage cooldown as a melee DPS away from all the mobs that we're hitting so we don't stun them. And it's just like, why? Why is that a thing? Why is that a thing that we can't actually prevent? And with how we use Metamorphosis, considering we have multiple talents that reset abilities off of it, that means it has to be at a very specific timing in our rotation now. So we can't just hold it a couple globals and use it somewhere else and be like, okay, yeah, it's fine. Unfortunately, that doesn't work too well. So I would really love to see Metamorphosis changed from being a stun to something else so that it does not hit into those stun diminishing returns. Next, we have an issue on Havoc where a significant portion of our damage is chaos and physical. Now, just to bring up exactly what I mean here, let me pull up a couple abilities. So first I'll pull up I-Beam, and then I'll also pull up Chaos Strike. So if we pull up I-Beam and we pull up Chaos Strike, there's going to be a difference between these, and there's a lot of abilities that fall into these two categories. You have one where your schools are Fire, Nature, Frost, Shadow, Arcane. This is referred to as Chaos damage. But there's a second type of Chaos damage. Physical, Holy, Fire, Nature, Frost, Shadow, Arcane. The name Chaos seems to really just be a general used term that doesn't really do much. Sometimes it includes physical, sometimes it doesn't. And if this includes physical, then what that means is Mystic Touch works on it. And Mystic Touch is a 5% physical damage buff, where our buff is 3% magic damage. That means any ability that is flagged as physical as well as magic, our buff is overwritten. Chaos Brand does not work on our abilities, and we gain 2% extra damage what we would otherwise have by having the Mystic Touch buff. On a class that deals full magic damage, about 70% of our damage right now is included in this due to a bug with the talent of Fire Inside, which converts Immolation Aura to Chaos damage. as of a Fire Inside being changed to have this functionality instead of the previous Any Means Necessary, that is actually converting it to the physical kind of chaos. And that also means that Rage Fire works off of it. That means Soul Scar, which is built up off of our Throw Glaive damage for a Reaver, is built off of it. Wounded Quarry, which is magic damage dealt entirely by physical damage. Chaos Strike, Annihilation, Burning Blades, which accumulates off of Chaos Strike and Throw Glaive, are fully buffed by it. This equates to, depending on your build, a 2 to 2.5% DPS increase by having the monk buff replace your own buff. And that means you want to fit into comps that don't use your buff because they're using the monk buff. It's very ass backwards. I really hate the design of it. And I would appreciate if Havoc was tuned accordingly and had the physical tags removed from their abilities. Currently, this is on things like Chaos Strike, Annihilation. I believe it's on Blade Dance and Death Sweep when they're talented into First Blood. The AoE portion, of course, is Immolation Aura, and then because Immolation Aura builds into Rage Fire, that is affected. And Essence Break. There might be a couple others that I'm just not remembering at the moment, but it does affect a massive amount of our damage. The next thing that I currently dislike is that we have a 1-second lockout on Fellblade and Fell Rush when you cast Vengeful Retreat. Now, Fell Rush and Vengeful Retreat have always put a 1-second lockout on one another. I think this is to stop any interactions of canceling the movement. I'm not sure why it's a full second, because Fell Rush is done within about a half second, so Vengeful would be good anytime after that. And vice versa, Vengeful is not even all the way done at a second. So if you wanted to cancel it with Fell Rush, I'm not sure why it has a second lockout on it. The reason this feels like a problem is Vengeful Retreat is not on the global cooldown. Fell Rush and Fellblade are, and they give you a half-second global. So that means if you, for example, Chaos Strike a mob, and then you Vengeful, so that you're going to be getting your initiative buff and your exergy buff, and, it's just something you're pressing rotationally, and you come off global, you might be waiting 0.7 to 0.8 of a second until Fellblade or Fell Rush are back off global, so you can get back in on the mob. Fellblade did not have this functionality until this patch. In Season 2, it was added so that if you played Inertia, which was changed to proc off of Fellblade or Fell Rush instead of just Fell Rush, it was changed so that Fellblade wasn't always the correct answer. But it feels really bad to play. I think this version of Inertia is by far the worst version that we have had, and it's really the lockout on Fellblade that makes it feel so awful, in my opinion, because it's just such a clear answer as Fellblade cancels your Vengeful Retreat. If this lockout was at least a bit shorter, like a half second or 0.75 of a second even, I think it would feel significantly better, and we would have people losing less DPS to incorrect playing movement talents, because of this really a lockout that doesn't exist for much of a reason that I can understand. Ideally, it would be removed outright. I understand why that might not be doable for Fell Rush. There may be some reason why you can't actually have Fell Rush off of lockout with Vengeful. That fucks something up in the game. That I'm not sure about. But we know Fellblade can and was like that, and it felt very good. And I have a feeling Fell Rush could easily be lowered on the Vengeful Retreat at least. So I'd like to see a change on that, because it doesn't feel good as it's currently designed, and really just feeling-wise, not a fan of it. Next, we have Fel Barrage. I'd like to see Fel Barrage buffed and made 8 target squared scaling, and what I mean by that is, if you hover Fellblade or Fel Barrage down here, you'll see it deals reduced damage beyond 5 targets. Now, reduced damage beyond 5 targets means it's square root scales, and going from 5 targets up to 20, it about doubles the damage the ability deals, but splits it among all those mobs. So instead of going from 5 to 20 targets, having it do 4 times the damage, like if it's scaled linearly, the damage to every target is reduced to about half when you're hitting 4 times the targets, and then at 20 onwards, it scales out in a flat line where it's split equally. On the other hand, we have Glaive Tempest, which is reduced beyond 8 targets. But Fel Barrage, which is a kind of designed to be a large AoE tool, at least it feels like it, is reduced beyond 5. And that means it actually does best in situations of like lower target counts, somewhere in like the 4 to 6 target range. But it's not tuned in a way to really be usable. It was barely usable in season 1, and that was overlapping inertia buff, student of suffering mastery buff before it was nerfed in Felsguard, um, treacherous transmitter, initiative, and I think there's another buff that I'm forgetting that was also being used. And you just overlapped a massive amount of damage buffs into the same window to like functionally double the damage while it was just getting used in your opener with Blind Furies. And even then, it was still barely ahead. Numerically, this is just tuned awful and like unplayable right now. Feels pretty bad for such an iconic looking ability. So I'd like to see some changes to that. I definitely think it should not be square rooted at 5 targets. Not sure why it is. If it went up to 8, that would help, but it could also just use a buff from there. Next, delete Isolated Prey. I don't really have much to say on this. I don't know what you'd put in this place, but I don't think this Isolated Prey talent really makes any sense to be in our class or our spec talent tree, especially because one of the 3 effects is increasing the stun duration of Chaos Nova. Um, Now, I did mention Chaos Nova earlier, and I did have a missed point on it where this Chaos Nova or Chaos Fragments for Chaos Nova that I talked about wanting to get removed earlier. Uh, I would like this to be replaced with a talent that increased the stun of Chaos Nova by 2 seconds. So taking it from a 2-second stun to a 4-second stun, and it could keep its 45-second cooldown. That would be, I think, a pretty nice change because Chaos Nova with a 2-second stun honestly feels very weak in Mythic Plus scenarios. And then you just compare it to like Leg Sweep, and it's just like because it diminishing returns mobs on stuns, it's something you always want to use like pretty much last as a final 0.5-second stop just to cancel casts because it's such a short stun duration. So I think it feels pretty bad. And with Isolated Prey, when are you ever fighting a single mob that's stunnable? Why is that an effect that this is doing? Um, but Isolated Prey causes issues where if you're not running movement talents and you want to get down the side of the tree, typically you have to run through Isolated Prey. So you're forced to take a talent that shuts off when you have more than one target. It also guarantees Immolation Order critically strikes, which hits our Aura of Pain talent and kind of hits our critical strike scaling. And then again, if you have more than one target, it just doesn't work. And it's just a 30% damage increase on Ivy. So like, it's you end up with a talent that can only be taken in pure single target, but you might be forced to run through it anyways if you're running no mover builds. It's in an awkward spot of the tree. I don't know why the Chaos Nova effect's on it. It just never has felt fitting, and I feel like almost anything else could go in the slot, and everyone would be happy. Next was a way to just passively buff 2 different things. So I would like to see the damage of Trail of Ruin brought up. Trail of Ruin is just a talent over on the right side of our path. In previous expansions, this has dealt a much higher percentage of our damage. It's down to a relatively low percentage right now. The reason I'd like to see Trail of Ruin buffed is 2 reasons. One, Havoc has been pretty inconsistent with having consistent way to deal any form of AoE damage. It's either been like all burst based or just damage dealt through other abilities. Typically, everything hinges around Immolation Aura right now, and Immora really is our big pull for AoE. Second issue is this tier for Season 3 with the Felsguard tier set, which makes it so that Chaos Strike deals 20% more damage while you have Immolation Aura up, and you have a Demon Soul that comes when you I-beam, and that makes you deal 20% more damage, which is buffing Burning Blades definitely as a bug. So it's buffing both the base ability and the accumulator. This is causing Chaos Strike to do over 50% more DPS during those windows, and makes it a stronger button to hit than Blade Dance and Death Sweep. So, rotationally, in this single target build that I currently have here, which is our best single target build for Season 3 at this time, you do not press Blade Dance or Death Sweep. There are some situations where you do. If you don't have your Demon Soul up or Immolation Aura up, then you will hit Blade Dance. Death Sweep you'll hit 1 time for your Demon Surge. And that is despite the fact that we have First Blood and we have Trail of Ruin because you have to pass through both of them. So, even with multiple talents buffing it, it's falling back out of rotation due to kind of poor design and just consistent buffing of Chaos Strike to make our single target fall in line. So, something I'd like to see is just a small buff to Trail of Ruin, or even a relatively large buff. Even if Trail of Ruin were to get like doubled, it would not really do anything crazy, but it would add more value to Blade Dance and Dust Sweep themselves, and it would increase our ability to do some consistent AoE damage that's not tied directly to Immolation Aura. Uh, just something else to feel good about on the class. It's just if there's anything to buff, I think that would be a good place to go to because it's been falling further and further behind from the start of Dragonflight to now, and now it just does no real relevant damage. Next part of the wish list is Essence Break's Hitbox. Essence Break is the talent we typically run in single target, not run in Mythic Plus so much right now. Partially tuning wise, partially because I just like playing it because the hitbox is so bad. Um, Now the problem with Essence Break is the hitbox is like a small cone. It's a tiny little sliver of a cone in front of you, and you'll very often hit the mob that you're currently targeting and hitting with other melee abilities. If you're trying to use Vengeful at the same time, you're not going to hit a lot of things. And if you're trying to hit a pack, you're going to get like half the mobs at most. I'm not sure why, but the hitbox just feels awful on this ability. So I would really like to see Essence Break receive a change in the hitbox, just so it's not such a small sliver of a cone. I I think it would make the ability feel a lot better in general. I know everyone's had that my Essence Break missed moment. It happens honestly kind of all the time. It's a very frustrating thing. So, very minor change. I feel like that's something that should have happened a long time ago. Would love to see that happen. Next is Cycle of Hatred. I'd like it to be changed to a flat cooldown reduction. Basically, anyone that's talked about it has said the same thing. I firmly believe the only reason that it is a stacking 5-second buff is because the name Cycle of Hatred, and if it was just IB's a 20-second reduced cooldown, the name wouldn't make sense. But whatever you need to do, if it needs to be renamed, please just do it. Make it a 20-second flat cooldown reduction. We still have the issue next season where, despite the fact this was fixed for keys, you can pre-stack Cycle of Hatred before raid bosses, and it takes a full minute out of combat or dead. You need to be dead or out of combat for a full minute without hitting I-beam for your stacks to drop. So it's pretty easy to maintain, something that's annoying to do, and when you enter a new instance, you gotta like charge it back up again, and it's non-zero to buff it up before boss fights. Sure, you can just take that out too, but then why does it really exist? Because we I-beam twice at the start of a fight, then you have a 30-second to 25-second I-beam, and every other one for the rest of the combat is 20 seconds, or the rest of a key. It's just a weird thing. It doesn't feel good. Don't know why it's the way it is. It would also be really minor. It's not much of a buff. It's just like something everyone wants. Next is Critical Chaos. Now, this is a talent at the top of our tree that we don't like running, but we only run it when you need to take Improved Chaos Strike in single target for 10% Chaos Strike damage. What it does is 30% of your critical strike chance to refund 20 Fury when you Chaos Strike. So if you have 40% crit chance, it's an extra 12% chance to refund 20 Fury. We don't really have Fury problems right now, and even if we did, 30% of your critical strike chance is a very pitiful amount. This talent is almost nothing in any situation. The most is like maybe like 0.4% or something like that in single target on builds that have a bit less Fury generation. It's incredibly awful. What I was hoping to see Critical Chaos change to is something that would be more fun. Havoc lacks any real. We lack any procs that kind of matter in our rotation, it feels like. We have RNG of Soul Generation, but we don't have something like we did with our Season 1 tier set of, like, procking cooldown reduction on Blade Dance, or a button that you want to hit. So, my idea was change Critical Chaos to be that when Chaos Strike critically strikes, and keep in mind Chaos Strike and Annihilation hit twice per cast, not once. So imagine every time that Chaos Strike critically strikes, you get a half second of cooldown reduction on Blade Dance. I just think it would be a nice way to feed into hitting a button that people do want to hit more. Something that could feel good when you do get procs back to back, or if you're in a large crit window, something like that, where you can actually feel a difference on the class, as opposed to a fury amount that really doesn't matter for us, and we just have issues of overcapping during our cooldowns pretty significantly. I do realize that one would be a pretty significant buff to the class as well, so I want to make a side note that this is kind of changes outside of actual tuning of the class. I'm not just saying, hey, buff Havoc, but, if we were to get changes and then nerfed and changed to be the exact same DPS, personally, I would be much happier with it. That's kind of the point of everything I'm going over. Um, not just asking for buffs for Havoc. I'm really just looking for minor design changes that might make it feel a lot better to play. Next is Burning Blades for Felsguard. So I've reduced Burning Blade damage for Felsguard, buff the single target Demon Surge damage, maybe slightly buff Demon Surge damage to offset in general. Now, I mentioned earlier that the new tier set, the Demon Souls buffing Burning Blades, and everything that's being done to Chaos Strike, we are having some very egregious numbers come out of this at the moment. Uh, just for reference, let me go pull up a sim that we have for our Felsguard builds. But what's happening is Burning Blades is the biggest part of this entire hero talent tree. It's just a random node off to the side to buff Chaos Strike, and it's also fire damage, so it doesn't interact with our mastery anymore. Yet it's somehow the largest portion of the entire thing instead of Demon Surge. I'm not sure why this is the case. I also want to note that out of this entire tree, the only way that it interacts with mastery scaling is because of Flamebound buffing Immolation Aura, and the main parts of this in Demon Surge and Burning Blades. I mean, Burning Blades gets scaled by our mastery, but Demon Surge does not, which I think is also an incredible mistake. So I'd kind of like to see Demon Surge go back to Chaos and eat a damage nerf for Havoc, however they want to do it to retune it, but I do think it feels very bad. Uh, but as I was saying about the Burning Blades damage, trying to figure out where that sim I had went. There we are. You can see Burning Blades is almost up to our top damage at 18.8% single target. This is with a tier set buffing Immolation Aura by 30%, running Isolated Prey so that it always guaranteed crits on single target, running all the Immolation Aura talents that exist. But Burning Blades is getting absolutely amped up by Demon Souls and the damage on Annihilation and Chaos Strike. Now, the thing about Burning Blades is it's supposed to do exactly 50% of Annihilation and Chaos Strike's damage. It's obviously not. Annihilation and Chaos Strike are doing 28% of our DPS, and that divided by 18.8%, or rather, let me flip that around, 18.8 divided by 28%, it's doing 67.1% of the damage of those. This is getting scaled up by magic damage effects that we have, like, I believe Demon Hide is doing it, Chaos Brand itself is doing it. This is getting buffed up by our aura buff on the spec, so if we were to say get a 5% aura buff, Burning Blades would also start doing 5% more damage, so it scales out of whack with that as well. And then the Demon Souls making it do an extra 20% damage while that's up too. So design-wise, doesn't make much sense. And you can see it's a little depressed down here, Demon Surge doing less than half the damage of Burning Blades. So I'd like to see Burning Blades retuned and just kind of nerfed down, and Demon Surge buffed up and made better. Because honestly, even in AoE, there's no situation that Demon Surge feels like it does good damage now. It's kind of pitiful, doesn't scale off mastery, nothing you can do about it. Just kind of sucks. And because I-Beam's not hasted, you can't get more procs by having more haste or anything like that either. There's no interactions or like positive stat interactions with this here. And we have a direct way to tune this on single target. If you were to say nerf Burning Blades down, buff Demon Surge by 20%, nerf Flamebound a little bit so that Immolation Aura is doing less damage on Felsguard, and you're less AoE focused on Immo Aura resets for your AoE, but you buff Demon Surge by 20%, and then you buff Focused Hatred from 50% to 100% when it strikes a single target, and 20% reduction per target. Then you would end up with Demon Surge doing, well, it would be about 60% more damage on single target. And even that is not an egregious amount. 60% more of this would be about 4% damage. So you could even get a bit more crazy with it than that, honestly, but just something to make Demon Surge more of the effect of Fellsguard, I think would be good. Especially in single target where it's really all about Burning Blades now. And as I mentioned earlier, it's now starting to have us drop Blade Dance and Death Sweep out of our rotation where these are barely getting hit. I think it's a really depressing place for the spec to end up in again after we fixed this issue so long ago by making First Blood turn Blade Dance and Death Sweep into single target chaos damage where the main target's taking about triple the damage of other targets because it bypasses armor, gets magic damage buffs, and does 95% bonus damage. And yet, despite all that and Trail of Ruin, this is a button that fell back out of use again because they've stacked so many multipliers on Chaos Strike. So, I'd like to see that pulled out. Think that's an issue. As a side note, while I'm on the Fellscrat thing, I kind of hate this Enduring Torment talent mixed with Monster Rising. Chaos Strike and Blade Dance do 30% more damage, so when you make them do 15% more damage out of meta, and then you give yourself 8% more main stat, they're doing 24% more damage, which means you're doing 4.7% more damage in Metamorphosis with Annihilation and Death Sweep over Chaos Strike and Blade Dance. Don't know why they pushed that. Feels really awkward. This was something that they buffed coming into this season as well, because it used to be 10%, and I already thought it felt weird, but now it feels like really bad that your damage in and out of meta does not feel different. But I'll move past that for now. Next was the Hunt. So the Hunt actually feels really good as Eldrachi. It has a core interaction with Eldrachi where it generates a Reaper's Glade for you. That makes it feel like it's a cohesive part of the kit. That's something that you think about rather than just a minute and a half cooldown that you press on cooldown and does a bit of damage. As Fellsguard, it's a minute and a half cooldown that you press on cooldown and it does a bit of damage. It doesn't do anything. At the very least, I think it would be cool if they would make it cause a Demon Surge. This would also make you want to line it up into a window where you're having other Demon Surges happen, so that you'd have your stacking 10% buff utilized in some way, and that is from Demonic Intensity here. So you'd like stack it up into an I-Beam window, or ideally into your Metamorphosis window, and it would be one of those extra Demon Surges to give you an extra 10% on all of them. And that would be, I think, a pretty cool interaction, plus something just to make the Hunt a bit more of a cooldown as Fellsguard. And just if any of this were to be taken into effect, kind of looking mostly at the Trail of Ruin buff, if there was going to be changes to Fell Barrage buffing it as well, and if the Hunt were changed to also do a Demon Surge for Fellsguard, plus other changes for Fellsguard that could buff AoE, increases in AoE damage can always be offset by small Immolation Aura nerfs. I think pulling some of our AoE damage out of Immolation Aura would be a good idea. If I go pull up a log right now, you're going to see a significant amount of DPS is coming from Immolation Aura in M+, especially as Fellsguard, but also as Eldrachi. Let me pull up two Floodgate logs. I'll do one that is Eldrachi and one that is Fellsguard. So we got Eldrachi here, and we have Fellsguard here. And with Eldrachi, you can see Immolation Aura mixed with Ragefire is at the top as 17.79% of our damage, and something that has a lot of RNG swings, where if you go in and look at Fellsguard, it is 34% of our damage. Over 1/3 of our DPS is dealt by Immolation Aura. And that is an insane number that could absolutely be pulled back on if other parts of our kit did justifiable amounts of damage. As I mentioned, Trail of Ruin really isn't doing much of anything nowadays. 3.78 here, 4.1% here. It's not really significant. The Hunt does just 2%. It's a pretty weak cooldown uh for Felsguard. So yeah, that kind of just hits everything I wanted to talk about. I think the damage leans too much into Immolation Aura. Um, and there are definitely some changes that could be made, but the biggest things that I really do want out of this would be stuff closer to the top. The I-beam damage reduction is something that I think would be a pretty nice thing to have. Plus, it could be another damage reduction for us to play around with. Uh, Honestly, if we were to eat a small or moderate leech nerf in return for that, I think that would be a fully justifiable change too. Our leech was supposed to be nerfed at the start of this expansion, and it was forgotten. This was supposed to be 6% leech, 12% in meta. They put it in multiple patch notes. It never changed. Um, and that could fully be removed because we go between being pretty much immune to rot damage in any scenario above single target when in meta, and then outside of meta, uh, in a single target scenario especially, it works out to be like basically nothing because you're not really doing damage and you don't have DRs. So you already kind of need to line up I-beam for damage events in at least high-end Mythic Plus. Raid on early progression, this could be really good as well, where you actually leverage your leech to survive, but we don't really have good DRs to deal with large damaging events or downtime where we can't leech. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I'd like to see that changed. I'd like to see, again, with the same thing, ability to get blur a little bit higher if Netherwalk was baseline. Uh, and quality of life wise, I'd really like to see Chaos Nova removed from the rotation and Metamorphosis to not stun DR mobs anymore. That's really about everything for my video. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. I appreciate everyone that watches. If you like my channel and my content, feel free to like the video and subscribe to my channel. For now, I think that's about everything. So you have yourself a good rest of your day. Bye.